generations, it has been read by Filipinos interested in the truth and the exposure of the political and social ills of the nation. Copies of it are passed from hand to hand, from reader to reader, from north to south, and not just in Manila. It occupies a singular place in the annals of Philippine journalism. It has been shut down only twice in its long history, and both times because the Philippines Free Press was a fierce defender of liberty and the public virtues. The Philippines Free Press first came out on January 20th, 1907, as a bilingual English and Spanish newspaper. From the very start, the Free Press was a crusading publication. It was originally the organ of the Moral Progress League, which was combating vice in Manila. The original owner of the paper was Judge W. A. Kincaid, its first editors Percy Warner Tinan and Pat Gallagher. But the Free Press proved a failure as a broadsheet. Publication had to be stopped in 1908. At this point, the man who would come to be known as Mr. Free Press and whose skills and industry would guide the Free Press to greatness stepped in. That man was Robert McCulloch, a dour, gifted Scotsman who had worked in newspapers in America and Hong Kong before coming to the Philippines in 1900. Mr. Dick, as he became known by his staffers, bought the Free Press's list of subscriptions, name, and goodwill for the token sum of 1 peso. Then, with his entire life savings of 8,000 pesos as operating capital, Mr. Dick reopened the Free Press as a weekly magazine in English and Spanish, a format it would retain until World War II. But its greatness would be inextricably linked to the propagation of the English language and the ever-widening number of educated readers, particularly among the younger generations who grew up in the 1920s and 1930s, who preferred their journalism to be in English. The Free Press office at number 44 Escolta then saw the arrival of Don Alberto Campos, who started as first assistant and then came to be the editor of the Spanish section. Percy Warner Tinan, yes, the same guy from the Free Press's days as a broadsheet, who took charge of advertising. And finally, F. Theo Rogers, a colorful American who arrived with the American occupation forces at the turn of the century, who helped solicit ads, refused to be paid for his services, and stayed on to become co-owner, business partner, and manager. The magazine became a voice of decency and moderation in the politically turbulent times of the 1920s and 1930s. Its editorials lambasted the corruption and political shenanigans of government and officials, a tradition it continues to the present day. Editorial cartooning reached new heights of skill and wit in the editorial pages of the magazine, while writers Leon Maria Guerrero, Leon T., Filemon Tutay, Juan Collas, Alfonso Torres, D.L. Francisco, and Teodoro M. Locsin exemplified the best of the new breed of Filipino journalists writing in English. The Free Press wasn't all news and political commentary. It fostered Filipino literature in English through its short story competition, begun shortly after the magazine itself started featuring works of fiction in 1925. Covering events of national importance and the arts resulted in the magazine becoming the most popular bilingual weekly publication in the country, with a circulation of 80,000 copies a week by 1941. And it gave us the Filipino everyman, Juan de la Cruz. Mr. Dick, in his days as a reporter, noticed that the name Juan de la Cruz turned up on the police blotters, and he often wrote little verses for the Manila Times about the manner in which Juan was brought to trial for his various petty crimes. Gradually, he enlarged his conception of Juan until he came to regard Juan de la Cruz as the typical Filipino, the friendly, humble, self-respecting fellow who tilled the fields and built the roads and worked in the mills of the Philippines. The idea was picked up by other newspapermen, and Juan de la Cruz came to hold in the Philippines the position of a combination of Uncle Sam in the United States, John Bull in England, and Marianne in France. World War II and the Japanese occupation resulted in the forced shutdown of the Free Press. Its publisher, Mr. Dick and Theo Rogers, were incarcerated by the Japanese. Some of its writers and artists, such as Teodoro Locsin and Easy Izon, joined the guerrillas. Others, such as Leon Maria Guerrero, chose to serve the puppet republic. However, in 1946, the Free Press was able to resume publication, with pre-war mainstays Locsin, T, Tutay, and Izon rejoining the fold. New talent was harnessed in the effort to mark the return of the magazine and make it once more the premier weekly. Nick Joaquin, Napoleon Rama, all gained fame for their work. One of the first advocacies of the established magazine was a campaign to prevent the postponement of Philippine independence. The post-war years were what gained the Philippines Free Press the epithet of being, quote, the glory of Philippine journalism, end quote, as one foreign authority noted and the New York Times editorialized. Fearless, relentless, uncompromising, the magazine exposed graft, corruption, and other myriad forms of abuse of public office. The magazine's efforts were rewarded with the public's confidence. Circulation reached 100,000 paid subscribers and thousands more who passed well-worn copies hand to hand, barrio to barrio. In 1960, Mr. Dick died, leaving the magazine to Rogers and the staff. The staff promptly bought the company's shares from Rogers, who had returned to the United States, where he would die in late 1963, making the Philippines Free Press finally Filipino and employee-owned. Teodoro M. Locsin, who had been writing the magazine's pugnacious editorials since the 1950s, became publisher and editor-in-chief. Under his leadership, the Free Press girded for war and fought the dictatorship it saw coming in the person of Ferdinand Marcos. The Free Press fought hard and consistently to prevent martial law, but the people were timid, and when Marcos proclaimed martial law, the magazine was shut down, its assets handed over to cronies, and its publisher thrown in jail. But 14 years later, it resumed publication in time to fight for Cory Aquino's presidency. Since then, slowly but surely, it has regained its position as the nation's most trusted and widely read news magazine.